While the mages devise a plan, Dunst topples into the chamber. He tells the group how Adel used her golem while fighting Zensa's copy. Bly stayed behind when it pursued, giving at least one of them a chance to pass. Dunst claims to have some information and wishes to collaborate. Metoda whips out some holy scripture to heal him, and he confirms that the replicas do not have a mind, so that rules out hypnosis. Lavina and Kana appear. The former reveals that her brother led an expedition into the dungeon and discovered that the monster creating the copies is known as the Spiegel. The copies do not have weaknesses. She explains that the monster is locked in the treasure room and is too vulnerable to come forth itself. Its only defense are the replicas, so defeating it means they cease to exist. Frieren agrees with Denkin that the sealing spell on the treasure room door is worrisome and likely the work of her replica. It's one of the strongest folk magic has to offer. To break it, they must take out the caster. Lavina tells the group that as time goes on, the replicas funnel down towards the treasure room. Most of her brother's party perished in that same spot, right in front of the door. Fern postulates that the replicas must have the same vulnerabilities as their flesh and blood counterparts, and asks Frieren to stand by a wall opposite her. When the elf turns, Fern materializes her staff and fires off an attack spell. The dust settles. Frieren is completely unharmed, a defensive barrier protecting her. Denkin is flabbergasted. How could they have missed such a glaring vulnerability? He was too wrapped up in his own notions of what a high-level mage is to notice when they fought. Lavina and Kana are confused. What are they supposed to be looking for exactly? Denkin reveals that every time Frieren casts a spell, there's a fraction of a second when her mana detection is interrupted, apparently a novice mistake. Fern wonders why she never said anything, especially since she's aware of it. Frieren admits it was never her strong suit, and why would she mention it? It's embarrassing. But Richter isn't convinced that the average mage could take advantage of such a minuscule vulnerability, but that's beside the point. With this new information, they continue to strategize. Fern notices that Frieren seems to be enjoying herself, and she is. The elf, smiling, tells her apprentice it reminds her of the good old days, when she and her old party used to plan on the fly in dungeons. After they finish, the mages head to the chamber door. It's time to put their plan into action. Frieren tells them not to worry. She's cleared more dungeons than any other living mage, and assures them that every dungeon can be conquered. Denkin asks Fern and Frieren if they're sure they don't need any help, as just the two of them intend to go in. They're sure. The fewer people inside will make predicting their enemies' movements easier. If they all enter, the casualties would be much higher. Plus, they need people to hold off the replicas that are on their way. Inside the chamber, Frieren engages her replica, which acts precisely as she predicted. Usually, the copy would factor in Fern's location, but it knows as well as she does how terrifying the elf can be. Even Frieren has trouble detecting Fern's mana, so once she has a clear shot, she must take it. And it has to be Zoltrak. Elves haven't had enough time with the spell to reflexively defend against it, and its speed gives them the best chance to land a hit. To Fern, the spell has always been around, so the elf is sure that Fern's use of it against the replica will be effective. In the past, after Flamma passed, Frieren visited Zadia to deliver her will. Apparently, before Flamma's intervention, humans practicing magic was forbidden, so she had spoken with the Emperor to change that. She wished for Zadia to take over the elite task force she was training. But that wasn't the future Zadia wanted. She destroyed the will and refused to comply with Flamma's final request. Zadia never agreed with her apprentice's wish to bring magic to the world of humans. In the next 1,000 years, she predicts that humans will advance and bring on a new age. She muses that if anyone were to cut Frieren's life short, it would either be the Demon King or a human mage. In the chamber, Frieren dodges out of the way, giving Fern a clear shot. She takes it. Frieren creates a small glowing orb that collects giant chunks of the chamber around it. The spell assembles the material into a giant stone golem. The replica fires back, but the attacks don't get through the elf's defenses. Everything is going down as expected. It's down to mana reserves. Whoever can hold out the longest. It's a battle of attrition. Meanwhile, Richter and Lavina ambush her and Kana's replicas as they make their way to the chamber. Dankin had briefed the group after Methode discovered the location of the doppelgangers. They decided to split up. Whoever anyone is most afraid of facing in combat is the one to take on their replica. Lavina freezes the replicas as she and Richter begin their assault. Elsewhere, Dunst and Kana take on Richter's replica, and Laufen takes on Methode's. Before putting the plan into action, Methode sensed fewer copies than test takers, the most dangerous among the missing being Zensa's, which could prove fatal if unaccounted for. The same for Fern and Dankin's doubles that require more precise techniques to locate. Lavina and Richter take out the two replicas with ease, but suddenly Lavina is pierced through the back by Zensa's replica, as is Richter before he has a chance to defend. Dankin rushes to their aid, but it's too late. They've already broken their bottles, and not even he can see an opening to attack the replica. Just then, Ubel and Land appear behind him. She asks whether defeating this replica is necessary, but Land says she doesn't stand a chance. Ubel doesn't bat an eye. She has a spell that can cut through anything she can imagine. Meanwhile, Zensa detects Ubel facing off with her replica and already knows the battle's outcome. 2 years before, during a test for second-class mage certification, one of the proctors donned his immovable cloak. The test takers were meant to use any offensive spell to just make him take a step backwards. Killing him was out of the question. Nobody was worried about accidentally killing him. They couldn't land any kind of effective blow. That is, until Ubel merely strolled by him and instantly sliced the mage in half, overdoing it a little and completely shocking everyone involved. When Zensa asked how she did it, Ubel explained that she just visualized the ability to do so and did it. From then on, Zensa knew she would lose if they ever fought. In the dungeon, Ubel makes quick work of the replica. Hair is supposed to be cut after all. Methode finds Verbal's group and fills them in. They've already taken care of 3 replicas, and they agree to help slow down the others. She points out Dankin's replica's position, and she'll deal with Fern's herself. She's already tested some restraining spells on her. Land finds himself restrained once more, wondering if it's Ubel's idea of a joke before they realize it's her replica again. Looks like the copies are just gonna keep coming until the Spiegel is defeated. All throughout the dungeon, the mages continue to tangle with the replicas. In the final chamber, Frieren continues fighting herself, but the gap in her mana detection isn't big enough for Fern to take advantage of. It's time for their backup plan. If Frieren creates a bigger opening, leaving herself more vulnerable, then hopefully so will her replica. And if Fern thinks they can do it, she trusts her to do whatever she must to win. Frieren squares off with her replica, defending against a large beam of offensive magic. She allows her defenses to crack, and her double closes the gap. Fern takes them by surprise, casting multiple instances of Zoltrak. It's a hit. She successfully lands a fatal blow. But before she can finish the replica off, it gives her a stare that shakes her to the core. Fern is immediately launched backwards, hitting the stone behind her with so much force it creates an impact crater. Her staff is smashed, and she's pinned in place. Confused about what happened, Fern doesn't even recognize whatever it did as a spell. Left wide open, Frieren jumps in and takes herself out. She congratulates the young mage. She hasn't been forced to use that in at least 80 years. The sealed door opens, revealing the Spiegel, which is destroyed with ease. Luckily for everyone else in the dungeon, the replicas instantly disappear. Zensa congratulates the mages for conquering the dungeon, and, as promised, passes everyone who made it to the bottom. Fern meets up with Stark. Apparently she got into an argument with Frieren over her broken staff. Heiter had given it to her, so when her master told her it wasn't worth repairing and to just replace it, it didn't go over well. In the city, Lavina is bummed out about failing the exam and having to wait 3 years for the next one. Kana notices Frieren lugging around a sack filled with the remnants of Fern's staff. Dankin and Laufen visit Richter's shop. He's in no mood for their presence after failing the test. The old mage tries to console him, but only irritates him further as he rummages through the shop and leaves a pile of items out of place and doesn't buy a thing. After the two leave, Frieren shows up. She's heard that Richter can fix any staff, no matter the condition. He tells her to give up on it, so she turns to leave. If he can't, he can't. Hold on a minute. He didn't say he couldn't do it. She asks if he can have it done today, before the next test. You know what? Why not? That's just the kind of day he's having. Stark and Fern make their way back to the inn and run into Richter. He's not pleased with her master. He alludes to repairing her staff and asks Fern to take good care of it. The mage remembers Heiter telling her about Frieren's difficulty in reading others' emotions. The elf herself is aware of it and will always try her best to compensate. The following day, Fern and Frieren arrive to take the third and final exam. Earlier, Zadia gathered the first-class mages responsible for proctoring. 12 mages passed the first 2 tests, which is unprecedented, provoking her presence. There's a problem. They have a mage far too powerful taking the exam, and if they were to continue with a regular test, those unfit would surely perish. So instead, Zadia tells them that she will proctor the test. It will be a peaceful selection. Zadia asks whether Fausch was able to detect Frieren's true mana. He was not. She explains that Frieren spent most of her life suppressing her mana to trick demons. Zadia thinks this was a waste of time. She could have better spent the time mastering literally anything else. Apparently, only the Demon King saw through it. That is, until Lernen caught a glimpse of a fluctuation. The final test is an interview with Zadia. Frieren concludes that she intends to fail both her and Fern. She thinks she still hasn't grown into the mage Zadia had hoped. Kana enters and is immediately failed by Zadia. She explains that, in addition to being afraid of the elf, the young mage can't even imagine herself being a first-class mage, and that which can't be imagined in the world of magic cannot be. Zadia then quickly fails Dunst, Laufen, Scharf, and Erde. When Frieren gets there, Zadia tells her that she can't imagine herself as a first-class mage either, for different reasons, however. She gives her one last chance and asks her what her favorite spell is. It's a spell that creates a field of flowers, the same as Flamma's favorite. Zadia fails her, and the elf turns to leave. Zadia wonders why she won't stand her ground with her. She's surprised she even defeated the Demon King. Frieren stops to clarify. She didn't beat him alone. Without her allies, they wouldn't have succeeded. Himmel had chosen her for a specific and personal reason. One evening, as a child, he was lost in the woods, scared he would never make it home. An elf pointed him in the right direction. Though helpful, he thought she was cold and intimidating, and never expected what came next. She apparently picked up on his impression of her and used a spell to create a field of flowers, which showed him the beauty of magic. Years later, on the lookout for a mage for the party of heroes, he spotted her and remembered this. Regardless of how useless Zadia thinks the spell is, it was precisely what brought her companions together in the end. Frieren tells her she knows she intends to fail Fern as well, but the girl will surely exceed her expectations. Fern enters, and Zadia thinks she's frozen in place at the sight of her mana, just like the others. However, when the girl mentions seeing its fluctuations, the elf asks her to be her apprentice. She declines. She already has a teacher. Frieren had warned Fern about the possibility of such a proposal and said that she'd pass her no matter what her answer was. She was right. When Dankin enters, Zadia expresses that she would rather have met him when he was young and in his prime, and elevated him to first class back then. But when she considers that, upon entering, she detected that he thought about what his strategy would be in a fight with her. She changes her mind. He passes. Ubel passes as well. Lond enters next, and Zadia calls him foolish for not stepping onto the examination grounds himself. But he insists he's right here at the door. The elf sees right through his deception. He's been at home this whole time. He has nerve. He passes. Verbal had decided quickly that it would be pointless to fight Zadia, though not out of fear. She asks about his favorite spell. He doesn't have one. It's not about favorites. It's about the right tool for the job. And for him, the job is killing. He passes. She asks Metoda what she thought upon seeing her. Well, she saw a very small and adorable little elf. She passes. Zadia apologizes to Zensa. She was wrong about how many of them merited first-class status. Outside, Denkin thanks Frieren and Fern for their help. Without it, he might have failed. Later, Stark, Fern, Laufen, and Denkin sit down for tea. When Stark learns that Denkin is a noble, he's humbled that he's being treated to this afternoon snack by high society. The old man mentions how his wife passed in his 20s, so he has no family to spend his money on. Denkin asks Fern to thank her master for showing him the joy in magic and inspiring him to become a mage. Nearby, Verbal sits beside Frieren. She tells him Fern was upset that he was ready to kill her group during the first test. Verbal kind of apologizes. It was mostly just a threat. His motivation for achieving first-class status was the privilege. He's searching for the most powerful spell. He'd do anything to protect his village. As a kid, he reveled in tales of Himmel the hero. The elders were always concerned with the hero's lesser deeds, and when his village was attacked, he finally understood why. His comrades show up, and he departs, telling the elf to cherish the people she meets. She's already figuring that out, and the reinforcement helps. That night, Fern's to be granted her privilege, and she takes Frieren and Stark along as guests. But it turns out Frieren's banned from any Continental Magic Association facilities for the next 1,000 years and can't attend. Outside, she sits with Stark and admits that she believes Fern will become a mage even more famous than herself. Lernen appears and apologizes for her treatment by his master. Frieren notices that he can see her mana fluctuations, and his demeanor suggests he's not built for an era of peace. He wants his chance to leave a legacy, since Flamma is Zadia's only famous apprentice. So if he can't get his name in the history books through some great feat, killing the legendary Frieren will gain him even more infamy. He suddenly attacks the elf, challenging her to a duel, but she refuses to fight him. Thinking back on her interview, she had noticed the flowers in the room were conjured by magic, Flamma's favorite spell. Zadia had said she was a failure as an apprentice, that all of her students were. Frieren knows this is not true, and tells the old mage Zadia was never one to tell her students how she really feels. Fern exits, and the trio heads out. Frieren asks which spell she chose. A legendary level cleaning spell that makes doing laundry a breeze. Zadia wasn't impressed, but Frieren loves it. Lavina and Kana catch them at the gates to thank them as they head out of town. Frieren bids them a quick farewell, and her comrades wonder why that's always the case. She used to wonder the same thing about Himmel. He didn't plan on retiring anytime soon, and always believed he would cross paths again with whomever they departed from. So a tearful goodbye would just be embarrassing at the next time they met. Thank you for sticking until the end. Subscribe for more videos like this.